So welcome everybody. It's lesson 2. It is a snowy Monday. And it's intro to web programming. Yeah, that's probably why I list you. No big deal. Yeah, you should be able to fix that. It's not required, but it is nice to see faces with names. So our first quiz was due last night. Yeah, no kidding, I'm sure. Yeah, not to have to go anywhere. My girlfriend was supposed to go to Oshawa for a business meeting, and she does not have snow tires on her company car. So she was very happy to cancel that meeting. So what are we doing today? So actually, we're going to make one quick change here, unfortunately. So we're going to use PHP to connect to a MySQL database. We're going to build a form. We're going to write a bunch of PHP code so we can save data to our database. We're going to leave AWS and get out for today. Okay, so quickly, you can just use the chat for this. Way to tell me, use the chat. What do you remember from last week's class? If you learned one thing about PHP last week, just throw it in the chat. What'd you learn that was useful? Throw it in the chat. Okay. I'll just do some copying and pasting. Thanks, Yum. Yeah, it runs on the server. That's important. Wani said the same. It needs to be running on the server. It will not work. Good point. Okay. Alex mentioned, and I'll just mention, Alex, also, we do need the PHP in there. So that opening tag's got to have the PHP. Okay, so we're not going to use the .html extension. Tyler said a lot of popular websites, sites like Facebook, run on PHP. Alex says, yeah, not visible on the client. That's right. Jenna said we use the echo command, the print. Yana said all statements terminate with semicolons. Wani also mentioned, yeah, the output of our PHP file is not visible. All right. Anybody remember as well the delimiter for a variable? Oh, actually, there's more stuff in here. Yeah, the code is interpreted. So Alessio said it's not compiled like Java, C#. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, variables are prefixed with a $sign. Thank you, Zane. That's a really important point. Well, you guys learned a lot last week. You guys have a great instructor. It's a loosely typed. Mike says code blocks are enclosed in curly braces, and comments are also Java style. One other thing I will mention, you guys have hit on almost everything, is vars are case sensitive, right? So we saw that as well. Yeah. Thanks, Raj. Okay, so that's a pretty good list. The keywords are not case sensitive, no, Mike. But anything we name, so file names for links, variable names, method names, all of those things are case sensitive. All right, so that's a pretty good list. So this week, what we want to do is we want to look at how do we save data to a database. So go through these slides are here on D2L for you. So this is the general process of how this works. So how do we save data? We're going to need a database with a table in it. And typically we're going to use 2 different web pages. It's possible to use a single page. I don't recommend it because the code gets cluttered and messy when we have a page that also does the saving. So, pardon me, in PHP, I found It's much easier to separate this process out into a couple separate pages. Next semester, when we're working with ASP.NET in the Microsoft world, we don't really need another page to do the saving. It's much simpler. We just basically can have a code library that actually does the saving. In PHP, it makes sense to have two different PHP files. So our first file is basically going to contain an HTML form. You probably worked with forms a little bit with Jeremy in your HTML fundamentals class. So you probably know a little bit about forms. So we'll work with them a lot in this class because anytime we need to capture data from a user, we're going to need a form. Yeah, cool. Okay, so you made a pizza ordering site. So you have a little experience with that. So that's good. We'll leverage that knowledge. But then most of the work goes in the PHP page that processes the form. Okay. All right. Good to know. Thanks, Alessio. Yeah, it's not going to be blank today. So we're going to get all of this working today. Now, we as end users, we fill out HTML forms and submit data to database. We do it all the time. Can you think of some everyday examples of websites that you use regularly where you are submitting data from the website and that data goes into a database? Signing into an account. Okay, Andrew, yeah, we have a login form, right? And we grab the credential. So we've got a form, we post it to the server. Our page then submits that login to the database and might record it. Yeah, you post to Twitter. So I go to Twitter. Right. What is happening? We are learning save data. So I've got a form right here with an input. Right? If I click the tweet button, it's going to submit, it's going to create my tweet in the Twitter database. Okay, yeah, Mike, absolutely. When you buy something, right, and you put it in your cart and you click checkout, we are creating, yeah, right, so let's go to, right, if we go here and we order, I don't want to create an account, but anyway, once I, buy something and order, it saves to, yeah, you create a support ticket. Absolutely. Again, all of these things, yeah, on a forum. We like something or we post something on Stack Overflow or on Reddit. All of this, it's this same process. We've got some kind of input, server-side scripting page that processes those inputs. Ultimately, it connects and saves that information into a database. So we do this every day, all the time. Okay, so it doesn't matter what the context, what type of data it is, what the purpose of the website is. All of these, they basically follow the same process, whether we're using PHP or another kind of server-side scripting language. So once we learn the mechanics of it, this is why I said last week, then we can build pretty much any kind of website because they all work the same way. So we'll give you a bit of an overview of this in a little more detail, and then we'll start setting things up. Okay, so I think of a form, it's kind of like your grocery cart, right? When you go to the grocery store, we don't scan and pay for each item. We collect all of the food we want in a cart. And then when we're done collecting it, we go to the checkout line and we process it all, right? We find out how much does all the food cost, and then we have we process a payment transaction. So our form is kind of like our grocery cart, right? It's a collection of inputs, all the inputs we want from our users go in one form. And no matter what it is, we've got a form with a bunch of inputs, and there's typically a submit button at the bottom. Here it says sign me up, might say save, might say checkout. Twitter, it says tweet. So we'll need, as you learned from Jeremy, you'll need a set of opening and closing form tags. And then there are two attributes we're going to put in all of our forms. We need to include the form method, which almost all the time is going to be post. Occasionally, we'll use a get method. We'll look at both of these in a little more detail a bit later. And then we've got this action. So the action refers to what page is going to receive the form inputs and process them. And it must have a PHP extension because that page it's going to include PHP code. So we want to write those PHP tags. We know we have to have a PHP extension for that to work. And then we'll have all of the inputs we need on our form and some kind of submit button down at the bottom. So, there's lots of different HTML form inputs. These are the most common ones. Single line text boxes, drop down list, radio buttons, check boxes. We might also have multi-line with text areas for big blocks of text. So designing forms, it's a little bit art and a little bit science, right? We're trying to make our forms intuitive, easy for someone to understand what kinds of inputs they're supposed to provide. And we're trying to make it as easy as possible. So giving them lists wherever we can, like a select box or radio button, wherever we can use these, we're going to. And we've already got this slide. So once we build our form, what does our save page look like? Well, all of the form inputs automatically get added by the PHP processor to an array called $_post. So this is a list of all of the inputs from the form, and it includes all the values the user entered. So we can refer to any individual input like this, $_post, square bracket, single quote, and then the name of the input field. And typically we'll take those inputs and we'll store them in variables. We don't have to, but working with a variable called $firstname, that syntax is easier, less prone to mistakes than this syntax. So I like to take all my form values and stick them in local variables. Makes it a little easier to work with. And before we can save the data from the form permanently, we need to have a database. And the database has got to have a table. You can't just save data directly to the database. It's got to go to a table, which is a container inside of the database. And every table has to have a defined structure. So basically, our input form will be similar in structure to the table we build in the database. So our PHP page, it does the connection between the form and the database table. It connects them and bridges them together. So the values can go from the form ultimately into the database. So we're going to set up a database table. Now, did you guys have your database class with Darcy last week? You did. Okay, so you installed the Microsoft database. Okay, we will use the Microsoft database you had it with Mozilla, sorry, okay. With Management Studio. Okay, that's fine. We'll use Management Studio in our ASP.NET course, but we're going to use the MySQL database for this course. Oh, you had MySQL last semester. Okay, good. Now, normally we have, and you have Workbench, great. Normally most classes will use Workbench, and we will use the database you have set up. You actually have a database set up on Amazon Web Services. The server is not up and running right now. I've notified our computer studies technicians, but that server, I think, is still offline. It's been offline for a few days. And I tried, and some other students in my morning class tried connecting to it over the weekend, but no one has access to it. So for today, we'll just use our local MySQL database. So I'll show you how to connect to it. So if you open up your XAMPP control panel, yeah, I know, files, yeah, the server's offline. So it's okay, we'll use AWS next week. We'll get it fixed. For today, we can just work locally. No problem, it's always good to have a workaround. So open up your XAMPP control panel, like we did last week. It'll open up this window. And we want to start the Apache web server. So click the Start button here. But we also want to start our local MySQL server. So click the Start button beside both of them. And they should both turn green. Apache runs on port 80, and MySQL, the default port is 3306. So you should see they both get a green highlight when you've started them. Okay. Okay. If you can't start it, okay. I think you may already have it running. If you installed it separately last semester, then you already have. Okay, if it's in use, it's already running. So this should be okay. Here's how we can check. So in your browser, let's go here. I'll put the link in the chat. Go to localhost. First, just load localhost. Let's just load your XAMPP dashboard. Go here first. And up at the top right, we've got a link here we can try. If this doesn't work, we'll go through Workbench. So go to, click the PHP MyAdmin link. Let me know if this opens for you. Okay. All right. So you can either use PHP MyAdmin. Okay, we're not connecting to SQL Server. We're connecting to MySQL. Yes, that's a good point, Tuani. That assumes it's installed in C. Okay. We can also try connecting to our server locally through MySQL Workbench. So if this is not working for you, you can open up Workbench, and your local connection is probably here from last semester. If it's not, you should be able to create a new connection with the default. Okay, yeah, if you have the local one, you should just be able to double click it. And this should open up your database. And we can use Workbench, that's fine. Workbench is probably better anyway. So we're going to create a local database, and then we're going to build a table in here. So our first command we're going to run here is create database. We'll call it PHP Tunes, which matches the name of the website we're building. Right? So usually every application gets its own database. So let's throw this line in the chat. So I'm just going to execute this code. I'll just click the yellow lightning bolt here. I get a green checkbox. It says my database command was successful. And I've got a little refresh button here beside the schemas. If I click it, I've now got a new PHP Tunes database here. Okay, so first we're going to create the database. We only have to do this once. Next week on AWS, we can skip this step because you already have a database created for you. So we'll use the existing database. We don't have permission on the AWS server to create new databases. Our next step is I want to run the use command. So we want to connect to this specific database. So our next command we'll just run is use PHP Tunes. So I'm going to execute that one. And you can see it opens up the database here. We're now connected to the new database. So now we want to create a table. I'm going to remove that command. You can't connect to your local workbench. Okay, that suggests your server might not be running. Let's see. If we open up the services, you search for services in your operating system. Do we have MySQL here? No, not there. Thanks, Alex. That's a good suggestion. Yeah, you can try running XAMPP as an administrator. Thank you, Alex. You can try running the MySQL shell. Let's see. That just connects to an existing server. So you can try Alex's suggestion, Raj. I may have to look at it with you after. I don't know why it's not running. Yes, okay, so it may run on the same port because SQL Server runs on port 3306. So if you stop SQL Server, the other thing you can do is you could change the port that it runs on. So I think if you go to the MySQL configuration here, you can also change the port. So you could change the MySQL port in this my.ini to something else. Because both SQL Server and MySQL may want to run on the same port. You can try changing the port or, yeah, follow Alex's suggestion. So now we want to create just trying to think which table we want to start with. Let's create an artists table. Okay, good, Gary. So we'll create a really simple table. Our first column is going to be an ID, which will be an integer. It's not null. And we want the database to assign the ID values as well. And we're also going to set it as a primary key. What does a primary key mean? You would have talked about this probably already. What does this primary key designation mean? Yeah, it's a unique identifier. And we can't have duplicates and we cannot change the value. So once we have artist ID, let's say 400, we can never change that ID number to something else. So it will uniquely identify, and we're going to let it auto increment so that we don't have to programmatically set the IDs. The database will assign them automatically and make sure they're unique. And then we'll have a name field, which will be a variable character length. Let's say a maximum 100 characters. And we'll also set a not null requirement here. So you cannot save an artist without a name. Yes, I am recording. Thank you for checking. The other thing we'll do is after we create the table, we'll want to change the auto increment. So instead of starting at 1, it will start with a higher number. We have to do this after the table is created. let's say we're going to use 5,000. Yeah, Raj, don't worry, it happens. I'd still try and write as much of the code as you can, but yeah, you may not be able to execute it until later. That's okay. It happens. Don't panic. So we're going to create the table with 2 columns, an auto incrementing primary key for artist ID, and a name that's a 100-character string up to 100 characters and not null. And now I'm going to execute my command, and my create table worked, and my alter table also worked. Okay, so we've now got a place in the database to store our artist data. Right? This is a simple table. We'll build an albums table as well, but maybe not this week. Okay, any questions so far? This last line is optional. We are setting the starting ID at 5,000. Without this last line, the first time we create an artist, it's going to get artist ID 1. So I'm changing it so the first artist is going to be artist 5,000. Tyler, it's arbitrary. In most applications, we don't typically start at 1 because sometimes users see the IDs as like URL parameters, and we don't necessarily want people to know how many records are in the database. Terry, I'm not sure I understand your question. Where is the file for this? I'm not sure what you mean by the file. Can you clarify your question, please? Alessio, we don't need to save it really because we're only running it one time. Once we build the table, we're not going to build it again. Yes, we will need to build. You always have to build your tables from scratch when you're building an application. Yes. We've got to figure out what tables we need and then write the create table statements to build them. And often we do this first. Build our database structure before we start writing our application code. So we need to figure out what data do we need, and you'll kind of learn how to plan out a full database in your relational database class. You'll do this in a lot more detail. So if we need 3 components, we need a database table, database and table. We've got this component now. We've got this empty structure to hold artist data. We now need to build our form, and then we need to build the PHP page that can process the form inputs and save them to our table. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. And I want to open up our PHP Tunes application from last week. So last week we built 2 PHP files and 1 HTML file. So we're going to build a form. Our form is going to be simple because there's only one input. The only thing we need to create an artist is an artist name. So I'm going to make a new file, which I'll call artist details. And I'll add my kind of boilerplate HTML. Nothing complex here, just regular HTML. Put on a title that says artist details. Dominic, as long as you can connect to it in Workbench, yeah, it's fine. As long as you can connect to it one way or the other, and that you can access the database either in Workbench or in PHP As long as you can get your table built and you're connected here, yeah, that's totally fine. And I'll open up body tag, and I'll just put on a heading here, again, that says artist details. Okay, super simple so far, just a basic HTML page. We should be able to load it in our browser now. So if I want to try this out, I should be able to go to localhost PHP tunes and then artist-details. So now our page loads. So now we can start creating our really simple form. So we only need 3 things on here. We need a label, we need a text input, and we need a submit button. I want to group the label and the text input together. We typically put labels beside our inputs. So I'm going to use a label, I'm going to use an input, and I'll use one other tag that will group them together, put them on the same line. So I'm going to use the HTML field set. So I'll put in a label for name. And then we'll use a basic HTML input. And I'll give it both a name attribute and an ID attribute. And I'm going to make sure, for consistency, that my field name matches. It's going to match exactly the name column in the table. Okay, so I want them to be the same, because the value from this input on line 11, it's going to get saved into this column of the artist's table. And now I'll just put on a simple button that says save. So you get a really simple form, except I missed something. It will look okay. It's going to show you next a bunch of form mistakes. Well, I just made one. When I click save, nothing happens. Why does nothing happen? What did I miss? My page looks good. Yeah, there's no form tag. Thank you, Akeem. Okay, that's good, Raj. Yeah, there's no form tag. So the form, there's no visual rendering, but the submit doesn't work without a form tag. So I need to wrap this stuff inside of a form. I'm going to use post as my method. My action will be save artist.php. Now, when I do this, notice it puts my end form tag here. I need to drag it down here. So the field set and buttons are inside of my form. So I've added line 9 and line 15. We won't see visually. It looks the same, but my form now should actually work. Now when I submit it, the form submit works. Now we've got another problem. Why do we get a 404 error? Right. We're posting to save artist, but that page doesn't exist. So we now need to go and make save artist.php. That will make this error disappear. So we will go and create that page. We'll make a page, save-artist.php. So the file name, it's going to match exactly the text in save action. Sorry, in action. Okay. Then I'll set up our usual kind of HTML template. So even though this page is blank, if I go and resubmit my form now, this will fix the 404 error. If the page didn't exist when I tried this form before, but now save artist, now that the page exists, my error goes away. So most of the logic and the work gets done on the save page. The form's pretty simple. In fact, there actually, for now, there will be later, but there isn't even any PHP code here. This is just a plain HTML form with a label, a form, a label, an input, and a submit button. So most of the logic and most of the work, it happens here on the save page. So we're going to go there now. And inside the body, we are going to open and close a set of PHP tags. So we are going to get form input using post array and store in a local var. This step is optional, but it helps us simplify our syntax. So I'm going to create a variable called name because it matches the name of my input here. It's also called name. So I can read when I type $_ my code editor, it recognizes all these built-in collections into the PHP library. So we're going to use the post array, and I'll just refer to it, that element, by name. And then if we want, we could just print it out. So if I do this correctly, whatever value I enter in the form should get printed to the page when I submit the form. So we can go and try this out. Then I'm going to show you all the common mistakes and easy ways that we mess this up. Because there are a number of little gotchas here. So if I hit refresh and resend my form data, whatever I've typed in the input is what shows up. I have another artist, all lowercase. That's what gets spit out. Okay, so the post array is what allows us to map the values from the form on and read them on the next page. There are a number of common mistakes here. We'll probably, including me, all make one of these mistakes at least once during this semester when we're building a form. I'm going to show you the common gotchas. Here's the first one. The first common gotcha, you don't have to make changes to yours. I'll break mine and then fix it. The first common gotcha is forgetting the method. Remember, our forms, they have no visual representation of the form tag, so it looks the same here. Now, when I submit, now I get this error. It worked before, but it says the post array doesn't have a name field. How come? Why doesn't it use post when I take out the method? So I took out the method equals post from my form, and now I get this error. That's right, Twani. Post is not the default method. Which is weird because we use post 99% of the time for forms. So if we don't specify method equals post, does anybody know what the default is? That's right. Thank you, Akeem and Twani. It runs the get method instead. We can actually tell, we can visually see that this ran a get request instead of a post request. How can you tell from looking at my browser? Thank you, Yama. When we see this question mark in the form input here as a URL parameter, that means we used get. Very rarely do we do this. This is actually dangerous. So most forms, we want to ensure we use post. Why is this so dangerous? What's the problem? Right, the users can see the variable names. Maybe it's a login form. If we use get, then the password, then the password is going to show up in the browser and be saved in the browser history. So if we don't specify a form, the default method is get. So we need to ensure we use post here. Exactly, Yama. Sensitive data is easily accessible when using get. There's one common scenario for get, and that would be this. The one place, so here's a form, we're looking at a form that uses get. Most sites use get when they have a search form. If I search for PHP, we see this question mark, keywords equals, and there's my search term. You can go to almost any website that has a search. I pretty much guarantee you the search form will use get. Go and read the news, click get. Let's say I want to search for, I don't know, right? Again, we see Q, which stands short for query, and it's got my keyword. So this is the only place that we're likely to see the get method is in search forms. We will, if we have time later in the semester, build a search form. That will be the only time that we use the get method in our form. So make sure you use method equals post. So that's one of the common errors. Second common error is leaving the closing form tag right after the opening form tag. This is an easy mistake to make, especially because your code editor will probably create the closing tag for you. So in this case, again, visually my form looks fine. But if I click save and nothing happens, this means I've closed the form tag too soon in my code. So the inputs and the submit button live outside of the form. So that's another common gotcha. This one is probably the most common, is forgetting the input name, or, again, I'll go back. My form looks fine, but because my input has no name attribute, this post name element, it's empty, it doesn't exist. Yep, that's a great, let's go look at that under network. So if I go to the developer tools and go to the network and refresh, so I can see post, and if I click on my post request, let's see, where in here, there's our, I'm just looking in here where I can actually see the, maybe under the request. Yeah, so under request and post, so there's no payload. If I go back, I'll put my code back. So now I can see my form data. Thanks for that, Twani. You can see I've got name and some artist. These are also case sensitive. The input names are case sensitive. That's another common error. So if I call it name with a capital N here, but on my save page, I'm looking for the post field called in the lowercase n, again, I'm going to get that invalid key. So I get invalid key if I've named the field with an uppercase. So we need to be really consistent with our naming. I'm going to use camel case, and I recommend you do as well. Yeah, thanks for that tip, Tawani. Excellent. So those are some of the common errors. Forgetting that the method needs to be post, ending our form too early, and having a mismatch, a disconnect between the name of our input and then on the processing or save page, not using the same name to reference it from the post array. Okay, I'm going to post, we're about due for a break. I'm going to push my code up to GitHub, and then you'll have reference to it. So just bear with me for a second and I will do that now.